Hello, my name is Mary Smale. I'm Director of the Sesame Institute for Drama and Movement Therapy. Welcome to Sesame. This DVD has been made for you so you can have an introduction to Sesame and the Sesame Approach, and we hope that you'll find it useful and enjoyable. The Sesame Institute started from our dream, the dream of our founder, Billy Lindqvist. And Billy's going to tell you now about that dream.
I went to sleep, and the dream was that I was in what was called a long stay ward of a psychiatric hospital, and everybody was separated from everybody else, as they always are inclined to be. There was no communication at all, and there was utter loneliness, and it was awful. And some people that I was training with and working with came into the hospital and started moving with the people who were so ill and kind of inviting them to come in and be together. And they did. They were together, they came in, and the whole of this isolated group of people became one group.
So from that dream, Billy decided that she would form a group of actors called the Sesame Cats, and they moved throughout the UK, going into homes, into institutions, taking very simple mind stories without words, and they had amazing results. People who hadn't spoken joined in enactments and spoke. People who had been stuck in chairs began to move. And doctors and nurses and occupational therapists and physios said, "What is it you're doing?" And they didn't know. They just knew that drama and movement worked. And there gathered a team round Billy, and they began to think about what they were doing. And from that there formed a way of working, the Sesame Approach, the Sesame Method, that set up trainings throughout the country. You may be wondering, why Sesame? It's a strange name to give to a way of working. And the answer is very simple. Ali Baba, in the ancient story, knew that there was riches inside a dark cave, but he didn't know how to get in. He heard the password, Open Sesame. He used the password, Open Sesame, and the cave door opened and he walked inside, and the things inside were incredible. Well, it was the same way with the cats and the people who were creating the course. They knew they had a way in, but they didn't know quite what the words were. They found a way of drawing on various strands of drama and movement, and creating them into the way of working which we now call the Sesame Approach, which opens doors for people. And this is what the Sesame Institute charity now does. It trains people in this way of working. It trains people to be drama therapists. It trains psychotherapists to come and use this way of working. It introduces people to the way of working. And it supports practitioners and enables researchers to grow and develop the work, which Billy started in '64.
How do you teach the Sesame Approach?
Well, you see, the Sesame Approach isn't something, for me, which is out there. The Sesame Approach for me is something that's, in a strange way, a sense of the inner life. So there's rather a contradiction in terms of teaching the Sesame Approach, because rather I see it as encouraging the students to develop a relationship with themselves, which will then affect their practice.
What is the most important aspect of the Sesame Approach to you? The most important aspect?
I think it's the body language, because people express more through the body language instead of voicing.
Being able to play and move.
Try to do it in movement.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, absolutely.
Growth.
Safety and going somewhere new.
Happiness. Finding the key to open up the doors within. That's the most important thing for me. And that might take a long time. Once you've found the key, you're there.
So, in as much as we can teach the principles and the heritage and the case studies, which of course we can do, and we structure the program around that, the Sesame Approach, when it's alive, is something that's very different for everybody. So it's something that we encourage students to develop their own relationship with, which is inevitably unique, based on some governing principles.
The Sesame Approach is made up of different components. We work with drama, not in a performance or acting way, but using spontaneity and play. We work with movement. When you move, you don't use words, your body has a language. We work with old stories, taking on the roles and characters and stories that have lived for many years and gaining from their wisdom. We work with the use of touch, in the relationship when people feel safe enough for bodies to come close, something new happens. And we work with voice, not as I'm talking just now, with words, 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 but with sound, with music, not symphonic sound, but with raw, natural, creative sound. And all of these components make up what we call the speciality of the Sesame Approach.
What we're not trying to do is create an aesthetically pleasing piece of drama. What we are trying to do is create the conditions for the client to feel safe enough to experiment with their own creativity.
I'm going to throw a word at you. You three work together, and you three work together, and I would like you to make a statue of that word. Cave.
Rather than method-based acting or learning too many techniques, it's about creating the capacity to be in the moment, which I think is so important when you're working within what we might call the play space with the client. In terms of the Sesame Approach, whilst we don't generally work with props or objects within the group work, what will often happen is when you're working one-to-one, then objects will come into play and projected play will become more of the method that's used. Personal play, as I understand it, is without objects and the whole body is used. The game, for example, Let's Be, will involve Let's Be aeroplanes. It will involve moving around the space, being an aeroplane or being an ant. The body is the main source of the play. the training in the drama strand is trying to, let's say, strip away the ideas of doing something right and developing in the body and in the psyche the capacity for being in the moment and being playful in the moment. So to that end, I do refer along the way to the work of Grotowski in particular, but also Peter Brook. You know, we don't need props, we don't need anything too clever, but the physical body and the attention and the awareness are the main fabric of drama and improvisation, and that we can then look at how that has a relationship with therapeutic processes.
I think on talking about myth, my kind of understanding as to what myth would be like was nothing like it actually is. And I think I've been particularly struck by the myth sessions. We did the myth of and I know that my feelings before that session started were completely different when the session finished. And just how it changed me just being in the enactment. And something happened and you couldn't have planned that, it was so spontaneous. And I found that particularly kind of touching in the myth session. So it wasn't what I would expect to happen.
Well, I think you can only teach story through story. And my starting point in teaching students who are here on an MA course is to take them right out of what they expect into the land of story. So I tell them this story, which is a Native American story about Naked Truth was walking around in the village, and he noticed that when he told and spoke to people, they wouldn't listen to him. But he noticed that his sister, Parable, would be listened to. And he said to his sister, "What is it about you that they will hear you and they won't listen to me?" So Parable said, "Do not you see? I have a fine robe on, so that when I speak, people love the robe and can see through it as they want to in their own way." And so Naked Truth and Parable made a robe for Naked Truth, so that when Naked Truth told his story, it was recognized through the robe. And it's something about that. It's about a moving away from the everyday into the place of the imagination, where anything can happen, and finding a way to help people release into their spontaneous selves. That may sound a bit, what's the spontaneous self? But it's the bit of us that has been born into us when we're young, but gets restricted in the everyday. And the bit that needs to be allowed out so that the more than what we've got in the everyday can appear.
The way that it's just like that hits you, you don't, because of all the Sesame thing, it's a bit oblique and you don't know what to expect in a story or in a movement when you start doing it, and then it hits you, and then you don't, and you surprise yourself in the way that you can express yourself with voice, with movement, with drama and everything, like it just suddenly appear. Sometimes not, but sometimes definitely there, and wow, that's me.
So the idea then is that if you can bring people into a story that they'll recognise, I think recognition is a lot of this work, rather than seeing or understanding, it's more like standing under, as James Hillman would say, going down to find more than we have in the everyday, and to bring that together in a way that we recognise something new about ourselves. Now that might be something that we've been frightened of. People often say that when you work in this way, am I going to find something I'm terrified of? But more often what you find when you go down into yourself is a resource that hasn't been used or that hasn't been tapped. And what a story can do is help you find that and identify with it. Come gently, or obliquely as Sesame would say, into relationship with it, and then think, yeah, this is me. It's not just in the story. It's part of my story and my narrative. For example, working with the story of Orpheus, which is a big story. It's about going down and bringing something back from the place inside. You would be working with people, getting them to look at the theme of trusting what's in you and not turning round to see if it's okay. It's a kind of common everyday theme. We're gifted, we've got something that's good for us, whether it's our music or our joy of life or our ability to do something. But so often we mistrust it, we turn round to see what's happening for other people, and the thing gets judged. So within the first bit of the session, you're warming up the body, you're planting a seed thought. It's kind of like an invitation to unconsciousness. Come and play, come and be safe, come and try this out. And then you would tell the story. Very important that the story's known, because we're talking about safety here. People then choose parts, knowing at one level what they're choosing. The story is then enacted, and this is where the therapy happens, because once the body gets to enact the story and take on a role, and if people are free enough to be spontaneous, they surprise themselves. They surprise themselves as to what can come out of that role. We are very insistent that they are not asked immediately, oh, so what do you make of that? Is that about your mother? Is that about your father? No, no, no. It's about allowing the symbol, that image, to simply be present and wonder about it. Be curious about it. What does that mean in my life? And a bit, then the next bit of the way out is to come back out of that land, as Peter Slade would call it, the land of the imagination, the land of the deep story, back to the here and now and the everyday through the grounding process, coming back to the here and now. And then there may be being time for what I would call a half-formed articulation, which is something that is very definitely not master of arts standards, but something that is the curiosity. I felt freer when I played that part. I felt angry when I played that part. No idea. And allowing that to be heard and witnessed.
Why is myth so important to the, or integral even, to the Sesame Approach?
Well, I think you've already said something really useful, because it's a very important part of our way of working. And it was really devised because a woman called Pat Watts, who'd been working in Jungian circles, Pat discovered a way that if you begin to act out these ancient stories, there's a different language that begins to get put together. It's not just the thinking or the verbal words that we would use, but the body begins to be able to tell the